Okay, this week I have some very special guests. I have Pete Dowling and Matt Jackson from Surreal Machines. They just this week released a product called Dubmachines, which everybody that's trying it is kind of getting their heads blown off. It's a really cool set of Ableton Live, Max for Live devices that are focused on delay and reverb type sounds. So one of them is called Magnetic, and it is sort of like a space echo on steroids. It's a really intuitive but really fun device. The other is called Diffuse, and it is a sort of like regen network on steroids. So I'm really excited to talk to these guys about their development process. Hi, Peter. Or Pete.
Hi.
And hi, Matt.
Hey.
All right, so everyone's going to have to bear with me a little bit. This is my first tag team interview, but hopefully it'll go well. So I am, first of all, for those listeners who aren't familiar with the Dubmachines product, why don't we give them a little introduction? So, Matt, why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Okay, well, like you said, it's two delays, magnetic and diffuse, and I guess I've always been really fascinated with delays. I think when I first started getting into electronic music, it was the first effect where I just turned it on and started talking in a microphone and was like, oh my God, this is so cool. And so I guess from that fascination, we just started playing with it. And it's something that I've kind of always come back to. So Magnetic it's modeled after, it's pretty closely modeled after a Roland Space Echo 201. I think I can say that on the air. And, but we took it a little bit further in that we analyzed a lot of other ones and kind of took what we learned and generalized it, abstracted it, and took what we really liked from it without modeling it exactly and kind of rolled it into something new that you can't get anywhere else. And then Diffuse is based off of kind of like a reverb model, but I always thought, well, why does a reverb have to always be a reverb? Why can't it be something more like this echo sound? So we kind of decoupled some of the controls and turned it into a delay, and now you can go anywhere in between with that.
Anything to add, Pete?
No, I'm really pleased you asked Matt first.
Yeah, well, it seems like he had the keys to the kingdom there.
Yeah.
One of the things with Diffuse, for me, when I started playing with it, I got into the digital effects processor game relatively early because I was running recording studio at the time, and I had a chance to play with some of the first like space stations and the early lexicon stuff. This device reminded me a lot of some of those older tools because they sort of embraced the echo as part of the reverb mechanism and kind of used it to do some really creative stuff. To what extent did you play around with concepts from some of that ancient gear?
Well, we took a lot of look at a lot of different models, especially like the old stuff, and definitely the Ursa Major was one of the things that we looked at a lot. Although we're not using the exact same approach that it uses, like we kind of wanted to embody a lot of the same sound that you get from that.
Yeah, if anything, Magnetic is closer to the idea of modeling, although it's not an exact model. But Diffuse was more playful, I think. But it was definitely in mind. All those units you mentioned, like the lexicons, and then Matt was particularly interested in the Ursa Major, and right. I did a lot of studying on that before it.
Yeah, that was a crazy piece of gear, simultaneously so good and so bad. It was, it was one of those early devices that and I remember when it came out at the time, I remember thinking how, this whole, this digital thing is so cool and it's going to be so beautiful. And then I heard it and, at first I was like, well, I don't want to have to spend money on an EMT plate. So maybe this is a good alternative. And it was very disappointing from that standpoint. But when I started,
it's not quite the same thing.
No, but when I started sort of embracing it for what it was, it turned out to be an extraordinarily fun piece of gear.
Yeah, I mean the diffuse is actually a really interesting story because we built an entire other device first, which never saw the light of day, and we weren't happy with it. So we started from scratch to build diffuse again. And I remember early versions, I was unhappy about the metallicness and certain 80s quality of it,
Right.
until Matt pointed out that no, we like that. And that's interesting. Of course, we try to do something which goes, between many different types of digital reverb.
Now, you actually bring up something that I'm really curious about. I'm curious to hear about both of your experiences with this process. So, the first time that I really worked on preset creation and algorithm creation for, effects that were going to be widely used was my work with the Plug-O system from cycling.
Right.
And what I found is after a while, it was really hard for me to remember what I thought a thing should sound like, because I got so wrapped up into what it actually sounded like that I would forget what was my original intent. Now, you guys seem to have had a fairly specific original intent. How did you maintain? So, like, Peter, for yourself, or which of you guys did most of the work on sort of like the preset and the standard of ranges and stuff?
Ooh, I think in terms of sound design, i.e. coming back to
Right.
this is what it must sound like, that was very much Matt's influence for me. I mean, that doesn't mean I wasn't involved. And of course, if you're building algorithms, you're directly involved in that.
Right.
But in terms of examples of how things should sound or ideas, we would discuss that quite a lot. And the best thing that we found is that rather than try and come up with something which we both together thought it should be, we would just both come up with things independently and then have a fight and
There
see who
wasn't
won.
much fight. I think we agreed most of the
Oh
time.
no, yeah. we did. It was more sort of the idea of, it was a sort of max patch battle fight sometimes. We would really throw max patches at each other.
Oh, sure.
There's a lot of materials being developed for it.
Well, what's nice is when you throw max patches now, because they have rounded corners, they don't hurt as much.
But wait, to get back to your question a little bit, Darwin, I think the presets was actually really hard because, the delay, it has a certain range, it can only do so much. And we really designed them to be something that you should load up and tune to your needs without having to do too much work. So, it was hard to make a preset which really embodies a specific sound, because the goal was that you load it up, and even with the defaults, you can quickly turn a few knobs and get something cool out of it. So I was thinking about the presets and thinking wow, what do I do with this? Because it's a little bit like making a preset for a compressor. It's not so program dependent, but it's you should tweak it once you get it in the mix.
In fact, presets for compressors I've always found insane. But
conceptually, it's weird, right?
It's interesting because Matt and I haven't actually talked about this, but I found it almost impossible making presets for the delays that we built because, as Matt says, they sort of don't sit with presets so well in some ways. But I think what happened with our presets, and I'm actually really pleased with them now, is that we used a lot of the more out there shaping capabilities of the devices in the presets. And so there's not a lot of very safe and default presets, but there's a lot of sound design presets.
Right, but what I would say is that when you just take the device itself and drag it onto a track, in both the case of the diffuse and the magnetic, they seem to be very safe starting points. Mm-hmm. Now, the one thing that I found, and I found this interesting, and I'd be curious to know how much thought went into this. I found that the way that the user interface was oriented sort of drew me towards the controls that I would most immediately want to tweak. And I'm not sure which of you were focused or if you both were focused on the user interface design. But I found particularly with magnetic, you've got the great big knob for the head setting. And really, if you think about it, choosing your head location and the addition or subtraction of reverb really is sort of like a key first step in finding the sound of that thing. How, in the user interface design, how much did you sort of like try to lead the user in a specific direction, or did you try and compartmentalize things just on functionality? What was your desires with the user interface? Because it's clearly a highly designed interface.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what I do. I think right now it kind of comes without thought a little bit. I've been doing it for a little while, but with Magnetic, it was pretty easy because there was a design to start with. Like, we're referencing a specific product, and that one is a really well designed and kind of famous thing. And part of it was to make the plugin fun.
Right.
Make it feel original. So that was definitely one of our really strong goals. Was we wanted to show people that Max doesn't have to be boring, and you don't have to just use what's there. Even though what's there is great and it works perfectly, you can still do something which serves your purposes a little bit more aesthetically or a little bit more programmatically. Just starting with the foundation for the Space Echo was a good step for Magnetic. But for Diffuse, it's got these big knobs in it, and I think that's the first place you start. And I think that's something that I always think about when I'm starting a plugin is, first you think about the functionality, and then you try and derive an interface around that, and you think about, well, what's important? What do I want to see first, and what do I need to access the most, and all this stuff.
Yeah, Diffuse, because it was we worked on it a bit later than the Magnetic. It actually went through a phase where it really was just a collection of the same size knobs in a device. And one day Matt just made 4 of them large, and it was a revelation.
Right.
How it can feel after that. Whereas, say, Magnetic, we had a layout idea from the beginning, but things like the breakout section, which offers more controls, that went through many different stages and looked very different at different times. And it was actually a question of making something complex as simple as possible. But
sure, I hadn't really thought of it this way, but the original Space Echoes with their big and centralized knobs sort of blazed the trail for it conceptually. But yeah, that's pretty smart. So, Matt, you said that you kind of have a background doing this kind of stuff, and Pete, those of us that are part of the Max world certainly have seen you around a lot. But what I'd like to know is a little bit about your background. So, Pete, why don't you start and tell me about where you're coming from and how did you get to the point that you're doing what you're doing now?
Yeah, so I knew this would be the scariest point of the interview.
Well, okay, yeah. Let me just say that when I ask this question, it really is open ended on purpose, because some people talk about like gigs they've done, other people talk about like their education, and some people talk about how mean their dad was, right? So it really sort of doesn't matter. You can take whatever is the thing you want to get off your chest, and now's a great time to throw it out there.
No, I don't think I should get anything off my chest. We'll be here for a long time. I guess it's interesting with the Surreal Machines project. It's been fantastic hooking up with Matt, because I've been wanting to do something which is structured like this for some time, because for the last few years I've been helping artists realize work, and so it involves a lot of one-off bespoke projects. So you spend a long time on large pieces of software that are going to do one thing in a gallery for 3 months, or for a piece that will be performed a few times. And so I've been working with visual artists and composers and people like that, and a few organizations, just helping them realize their art. And yet most of the time when I do my own patching, let's say at home, it's working more on things like what I've been doing with Surreal Machines, the Dubmachines project. I started getting into making really solid reusable code. When I first started using Max quite a long time ago now, it was just as an artist myself, and I used to make these huge complex, very messy patches which were only to serve my own ends. And it's been a sort of journey in recent years, taking all that knowledge and enthusiasm and sort of beating it about the head to get it into a position where it could be useful for other people. So that's sort of where I'm at now. My history is I used to be a performer. I would perform a lot. I was a saxophone player and was in the free improv scene for quite a while. And I played a lot of electronic music as well. And before that is ancient history, really. But I have my study was all a long time ago. I studied classical music, and although I didn't really spend much time doing anything classical, I was lucky enough to discover reel-to-reel tape studio very early in life, relatively early in life, and I was always fascinated from then on. That's a sort of roundabout way to avoid your question.
Well, very well done. You're quite a savvy avoider there. Matt, why don't you give us a little background on yourself?
Okay, well, as a child of the 80s, I guess I was always really, really fascinated by synthesizers and stuff. Like I remember kids in my neighborhood and stuff would come over to my house to listen to Michael Jackson Thriller and have like breakdancing contests and stuff, and like put on Africa Boombada and whatnot. So I guess I always just thought that these cool new sounds that are coming out, had never been heard before, were interesting, and always got kind of just followed it a little bit. And then in college or maybe high school, I found out about this program called Buzz, which is a tracker. And I think even Richard Devine mentioned it on one of your former podcasts.
Right.
And it's like this modular environment where you can just like hook up different effects and instruments. And what was really cool about it was free, and it had like a community that was kind of like a family, and people would just put out new plugins every week or so. And I just started playing around with them a lot. And because it was like a community, I could talk to the developer and just make suggestions like, oh, I wish it could do this. And I wish it worked like this, and started following conversations and just started really getting into thinking about how this stuff should work more than actually making music. And so kind of went from there and started making music a little bit, traveled around with this guy, Andreas Tilliander, who helped us a lot with this project, who was on Rasta Noten at the time as Mokira, and now he's TM404. Playing with him, and he showed me Reactor, which I'd always heard of, but I didn't know much about. I had been using Synthedit for a while,
right,
and building things, and yeah, just kind of got hooked on making things, because I always liked making things as a kid, and I liked Legos, and I liked going with my dad and nailing some wood together, and so I really got the satisfaction of like merging my interest in synthesizers and making things. I built this kind of weird drum synth program, which was basically a ripoff of Propellerhead's Redrum with a friend of mine, Eflem, and we called it Tatted Poem, and kind of put it out there, and it got good reviews and stuff like that. It was just like a freeware thing. We made like an open source project, and one day I saw a job opening in Berlin for a product designer at a company called Native Instruments that I'd always really liked. I just kind of applied for it, and somehow after like a year of process, got a job there designing Reactor. Kind of like came around full circle. So became a product designer for that program, and then started doing product design for Absinthe and Guitar Rig, and then some of the all of the Reactor powered by this Reactor player thing, and all the instruments that came out like Mouth, Finger, and Razor.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess I've just been kind of addicted to building things, and I immediately moved to Ableton when I was making music after I moved away from Buzz, and always had a huge passion for that software, and always was really interested in how it could work better and what was going on with that, and moved over to Ableton and got really into Max. I'd always been really interested in Max, but because it was a new language, was kind of scared to get started, and then once I got into it, it was just hooked immediately because it was so easy to patch things together and so flexible. You could make your own externals, and I guess I'm rambling now.
No, that's cool, because I think it's a very interesting trail that you took. I have a quick question. Whatever happened to Buzz? I heard a rumor that the developer just had like a hard drive crash and lost all the source code or something, but that sounds unbelievable.
Yeah, I mean, I think that sounds unbelievable as well. That happened, and it just seemed like a really strange excuse for. I don't know. I mean, I loved Buzz, by the way, as well. I was using one of the funny things Matt and I found out about each other is that we both used that software. But I have no idea what happened. I mean, I know he's doing it again now, isn't he? Matt, maybe you know.
Yeah. So somehow he magically fixed his broken hard drive and started building it again.
That's hilarious. Because one of the funny things was I used to run a website called Creative Synth.
Yeah.
And we actually had one segment of the website kind of dedicated to tutorials on making buzz machines. It was actually a pretty big deal. There was a lot of people that were really, really into that at the time. So now I'm curious, though, hearing about the diversity of background between the two, of how you approached a co-authored development. I think that it's curious because an awful lot of people that do this kind of thing are either lone wolves, or if they do have people that they work with, they're highly defined roles. You know, one person is like a code monkey and the other one is the gregarious marketing person, right? But it sounds like you guys definitely collaborated and worked together, and your backgrounds would imply that you both were very much integrated in the code. So, like Pete, how would you define the what you each did in this project?
Okay, I haven't thought about it that much, actually, mainly because it's gone so well, I think. But as you can probably hear, we have pretty diverse backgrounds. Although I do want to point out that I also used to dance to Thriller when I was young. What happened is I'm actually quite a lone coder. I do sit in my bedroom and code. That's just the sort of guy I am. And Matt and I actually met on some beta forums, and Matt was basically posting this insanely ambitious gen code, and I would post back with my obnoxious versions of it. And so we got to know each other that way, and actually we decided to collaborate through our use of Max, not through any other shared background. And it turned out that we both had really similar interests with what we wanted to do and how we wanted to approach it and what we felt about what things should be done in Max for Live devices and things like that. And also, yeah, as you say, we both very much are both doing everything. We both code, and we share it and we talk about it and we change it. But sometimes with collaboration, you've just got to let go and do your own thing in the hope that your coding partner won't diss it, basically. And also in the sense that things which are made by committee never work. And so in our devices, there's actually things I could point to where I think, well, that was my idea. And that was Matt's idea, and they sit together really well. And we went about it quite methodically. We've built a huge library of Max code to share together, so we use the same modules which we built. Sure. So it's not just a question of throwing things into a Max for Live patch.
True. I mean, we spent a lot of time just getting ready before we even started. So we had some like prototypes floating around, but then we started building a library because I guess we both knew we needed it, and Gen is still kind of new, and there wasn't like a really good place to stock up on these things. And I think we both wanted to know exactly how the things we were using worked in the first place. So yeah, there was a lot of time just kind of like merging thought patterns.
Yeah, I mean, that's the best thing we did, I think, is just spend time with lower level things before embarking on a bigger project. Because actually I learned a lot about code from Matt's code, for example, as well as about collaborating. But yeah, you do have to organize yourself. I don't know. Matt and I are both we're both quite direct people, and so there's a lot of no, yes, no, don't do that. This sort of communication, but we just seemed to muddle through in the end, and we had a clear vision, but there's still room for muddling, and muddling is where the fun is as well. Actually,
Sure. Well, what I'm curious, and I'll throw this at you, Matt, since Peter just gave us the overview. Is there like parts of the design that are like no touch zones? So it's sort of like, this is my area. Please don't fuck it up, right? Is there parts of it that either of you have?
I really wish there weren't. Like, I really try very hard to say no. Like, in anything that you can improve should be improved. But, if you do spend a lot of time thinking about something or working on it, of course you get attached to it. But I think we were both really good at just letting go when we had to. I think that's super important, because you're never going to get past a certain barrier unless you can just say, you know what, someone else has got to try something new here to push it past where I could take it myself.
Matt is better at letting go than me.
Oh no, that's not true.
But I would say I have got a hell of a lot better at that through working with Matt. And so Matt's right in that most often you find that your own code gets better when someone else has a go at it.
Sure, I agree. Now, one of the other things that you mentioned that I think is really interesting to sort of think about is this idea that Gen is new. And I actually really agree with that from kind of a funny perspective. Max, the language, is what it is because it's sort of been massaged for the last 20 years to become what it's become. Gen is a relatively new thing, and so I think that a lot of what are becoming norms, or what are norms in Gen, are still being developed, and libraries of use are just now being developed because it takes a while for those things to come together. Was there any point where you felt like I can't really go here with Gen, or conversely, I just feel a lot more comfortable with either C++ or straight Max because that's what I'm used to?
I felt immediately comfortable with Gen because I think Max in general is a language I've only been using for 3 or 4 years now. And I guess I kind of always knew how things worked better than I knew the actual modules that were built into Max. Because, Max has so many powerful tools, but you really got to dig into the examples and other people's patches to understand all of their unique powers. But when you build something up from the bottom, you do it just to do exactly what you want. I guess I always felt more comfortable with Gen. But of course, there's stuff in the GUI that you just can't do with Gen, of course. So
of course.
There you have to use Max.
Yeah, I agree. I have loads of opinions on this subject, so I better be careful. I think it's funny the way Gen seems to be seen in the community at the moment. It's still seen as the thing you do fourth after you've learnt Max, MSP, and Jitter. And the funny thing about Gen is because it hasn't had the 20 years of massaging, I think it's the easiest part of Max to learn, by none. I think it's easier patching in Gen than it is in data in Max. It's so logical and it's so well thought out. And yes, there's a lot of talk about how it's low level, but it's only low level if you want it to be. And it's been made in such a way that it feels like patching an MSP. You've just got to think differently because of the audio graph, I guess, the one sample.
Right.
For me, I was so lucky to get my hands on Gen and feel, oh, right, this is what I always wanted in Max. And so actually, I feel what happened initially with me is I started to forget my MSP skills because I wasn't using it. And that's one of the other sort of traps that I fell into, that some people think coming to Gen is that if it's in Gen, it means it's better. Rather than Gen is something you use to do specific things. And actually, with this Dubmachines project, there was no point I felt limited by Gen. For this project, it was perfect. There were a couple of other projects which Matt and I have on the back burner where there are some things which are quite difficult. And we've been considering some C externals. But the thing I love about Gen is that I don't want to have to write C code.
Yeah. You can't forget to mention that, we are using the externals that Alex Harker so generously donated to the community.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be possible to get that Spring sound without the convolution that we got from his C++ code.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it would be...
I think that's also a really interesting example about how, like, a product that's already out there gets reused and recycled in a meaningful way.
Yeah, I just want to second that kudos to Alex Harker. His library is astonishing, and the fact that I can go and look at all his code on GitHub is also pretty wonderful as well. And you couldn't have done what he's done in his convolution externals in Gen, for example. Not at the moment, anyway. I don't know what you have planned, and so actually it was a really nice mix to use his external and also mix them with Gen in the delays we built.
I also feel like I'm learning a little bit more about you just through your discussions of Gen, because when we were first talking about it and you were talking about how you could control everything, I kind of scribbled down, is Gen for megalomaniacs?
Why? Because we're megalomaniacs?
Well, no. I mean, the way you were talking about it, it's sort of like, I don't want to cede control to the other people, right? Which means that I'm learning about how your approach to the world works, right? But it is really interesting to think about it, because you're right. I fall into the same trap that I think a lot of people do, which is to think of Gen as like a low-level tool for making something that in some undefinable way is supposed to be better, when in fact it's just a different way to approach or to attack the data stream. It's a trap that is clearly a common one because everybody falls into it.
Yeah, it's the thing is also maybe it's something that happens with something really new and exciting. I think the thing is when Jitter was released, it was different enough, i.e. it was tackling a different type of data for it to maybe not fall into those traps. But Gen is really adding to MSP and Jitter. And so it's still got this shiny, new, exciting feel to it as well. I would say that Max is for megalomaniacs, to be honest. the whole thing.
Well, yeah, there's that. So when I crack open, when I hit the edit button on the Dubmachines stuff, I'm presented with some of the cleanest code that I think I've run across. Because believe me, as part of my job, one of the things I do is I get a lot of Max for Live devices and crack them open just to see how people are doing, because you can learn about how people are learning about the software by seeing how they patch, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
First of all, have either of you guys been in the military? Because it definitely has that row and column grinning, like in a very lockstep kind of way. I mean, it is beautiful and it's super understandable. To what extent did you feel like you needed to do that just to make it easier for each other to use? Was this another place where collaboration kind of became a thing, or is that just the habit of one or both of you?
Pete, you take that one.
Okay. I'll take that one. Actually, what you just said there at the end, Darwin, was very true in some ways. When you're collaborating, you have to be able to communicate with each other. It's almost no good sharing patches which are almost impossible to understand. Like you may have come up with some great sounding idea, but it's no good if your fellow coder can't really dig into them. And of course, the other thing that happens over time is you develop a style together. And so I feel that our patching style has changed slightly. And I try to be more Matt-like, and Matt tries to be more me-like, But I must admit, I haven't. Maybe we should have discussed this, Matt, beforehand in case this came up. But I have to admit that we do actually have different ideas on how patches should look. And so what I'll do is I'll speak personally about it. And it's I'm not speaking for Matt here, but I actually do get upset, let's say, if I come across a great patch and then open it up and find that I can't understand it. I think being clear is just something which the community deserves if you want them to see if you want them to benefit from your code. If it was a VST plugin, I wouldn't care at all what my code looked like inside. But just because it's something which can be looked at, I didn't want people to be disappointed. And on top of that, I do genuinely have some serious OCD problems with patching, and it really slows down my patching. I have to admit, like sometimes I make a patch just for myself. And it's needlessly neat, and I've actually learned to stop doing that so much, because the other thing is if you try and make things too neat too early on, of course, it's just a disaster. And also, if you try to make things too neat, then they actually become incomprehensibly neat. And so I guess what we did with Dubmachines was towards the end, I asked Matt if it was okay if I could tidy them up a bit.
Okay.
So that's my response. I don't really want to take credit for anything military.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, when I start with ideas, I'm just drawing wires all over the place and not even leaving comments and giving weird names. And then once I start to see the patterns, then I may even go back and start over from scratch, or just start ripping out pieces and using copy, paste, duplicate, and I think really like showing the patterns visually really makes it understandable and also reusable for yourself. So I try and reduce things down to the simplest element possible, and then make it reusable. So I tend to think very object-orientedly and try and just lay things out like that.
Yeah, I remember when Matt first did one of the core elements of one of the devices, it was so simple, and it's something we'd been struggling with for a while. And I really appreciated how easy it was to read and how clear it was to understand the process so that I could get involved. And there were a couple of moments I overcomplicated some things in the devices and ended up just deleting them and making them again afresh, in a simpler style. And so, I'm not, I guess my answer wasn't intending to preach. It was more of a confession.
Oh, no, that's preachers have to confess occasionally too, right?
Well, one thing that I think is really good about Pete's style is he always leaves like really great comments everywhere.
Yeah.
So when you're you're taking a walk through the woods, you can really find your way and you know exactly where you are.
Well, and it wasn't only comments, but it was like the naming conventions for things and stuff. Just the clarity that comes, because you had like these multi-layered gen things, right?
Yeah.
And just the naming conventions that you used for the gen subpatchers just made it so that I felt like I was just taking a walk through a familiar park. It was it was a real pleasure to look at, and I think that's important because unlike so many coding environments, this is one where distributing your product also is distributing the source. It is like by default an open source project because you can open it up and look at the source. How intimidating did you find that? I mean, since Pete, you're already a little OCD about that, I can see where, maybe it wasn't as bad, or maybe it was horribly bad. I don't know. What was your perception of that?
I mean, it's something I think about, but not in the sense that I feel oppressed by it, more in a sense that, as I said before, I do have a certain sense of if someone wants to learn something from it, then it's good if it's clear. With regards this project, I think Matt and I both have quite strong ideas about how, the sorts of things we'd like to see in Max and Max for Live devices. And so we just try to do it the way we would like to see it when we open it up. And also, it's in this case, I think there's a part of it which is an act of sharing. You are saying, I share this. And unlike like all those hundreds of projects on GitHub you see with people's open source code that you just cannot make head or tail of all the code because it's just so messy, and someone shared something or other and that's it, and then they abandon it. I like the idea that by documenting your code well, it at least has a certain amount of longevity, and that's part of the process of these devices and of Macs for Live.
I think that's a really important point, which is the information that's provided by the source actually adds to the longevity of the project, because people are going to look to it not only for the cool sound it has, but also for the sort of like educational purpose of learning more. Specifically, since because there's a lot of gen code in there, people can actually take this kind of new environment and see how someone else approached it.
Yeah. I mean, it has to be said, the most important thing for us is the sound. Still.
Right.
It's not like we're producing a pedagogical tool. It just has that element to it.
Wow.
But I mean, that is to say, he's totally right. The sound is really what was driving the whole thing, and that's what matters in the end. I mean, we could have released a bunch of spaghetti code. If it still sounded good, I think we would have been somewhat happy. Yeah, but I mean, we do also see this as like, if you're a Macs freak and you're buying this, you're not only getting a great plugin, but there's also, a lot of reusable stuff in there that you don't have to develop yourself anymore. And that's pretty big bonus. So making that easy to understand and showing people some good design patterns and that kind of thing was pretty important to us as well.
Fantastic. So what's next from Surreal Machines? What do you guys have in the hopper that you can talk about?
Matt?
Well, I think, we still have to talk about this amongst ourselves a little bit. I mean, we have so many ideas, it's really hard to pick, but we'd like to do later on down the road, we'd like to do some instruments, of course, but I think we're still talking about what the next thing will be. But
there will be a next thing.
There will be a next thing.
Yeah. We have a few ideas for more releases, basically.
Well, fantastic. We'll all be looking forward to that. Well, our time is up. I really appreciate you guys spending time and being willing to sort of reveal a little bit about how you do the things you do. Again, I want to really congratulate you on the fantastic release and the excitement that it stirred up. It's really beautiful work, both looking and particularly sounding. So congratulations on that.
Thanks very much, Darwin.
Thanks, sure. Darwin.
And thanks a lot for taking the time for the talk. It was great. It was a lot of fun.
Cool.
All right. Have a great day.
Cool. See you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, another one in the bag. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. If you have a chance, go out to surrealmachines.com. It's a pretty awesome thing. Take it for the test drive, see if you like it. Thanks again for everyone that's helping out with the podcasts. And if you have any questions, make sure you shoot me email, ddg@cycling74.com. Thanks, and see you next week.